Today we will learn and reflect on the Eighth Commandment. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor, or do not slander. Stated positively, we are exhorted to protect the reputation of our neighbor, which is the opposite of slander, or harming the reputation of our neighbor. This is the Eighth Commandment because the Catholic Catechetical tradition splits the commandment against envying and coveting into two commandments. One against coveting your neighbor's wife, concupiscence, and another commandment against coveting your neighbor's possessions. At the end of our talk, we'll discuss the sources used for this video. Please feel free to follow along in the PowerPoint script we uploaded to SlideShare. Please, we welcome interesting questions in the comments. Let us learn and reflect together. The Eighth Commandment in the Catholic Catechism exhorts, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." Many people shorten this commandment to, "You shall not lie." And although lying is usually sinful, this is a shallow understanding of the commandment, as sometimes lying is not sinful. And one vivid example is Schindler's List, where his virtuous lies saved thousands of his Jews in his factories. It was said to men of old, "You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn." And the short summary of this commandment in the Catechism is very carefully worded. The Catholic Catechism teaches us, the Eighth Commandment forbids misrepresenting the truth in our relations with others. When we say something truthful yet hurtful about our neighbor, we show we do not love our neighbor. We show we delight in shredding his reputation. The Catechism continues, this moral prescription flows from the vocation of the holy people to bear witness to their God, who is the truth and wills the truth. How we treat our neighbor bears witness to the world on whether we are truly Christian. Offenses against the truth, expressed by word or deed, a refusal to commit oneself to moral uprightness. They are fundamental infidelities to God, and in this sense they undermine the foundations of the covenant. God is love, God is truth, God is kind, and we deeply offend God when we harm our neighbor by damaging his reputation. Why does this commandment not say, "Thou shalt not lie," or "Thou shalt not slander," but rather forbids that we shall not bear false witness against our neighbor? Is this commandment more concerned with our testimony in court than what is our motivations and our intent? Now, what is true that there was no forensic science in the ancient world? Eyewitness testimony was often the only evidence, and sometimes the only permissible evidence. In the ancient world, there were few rules restricting frivolous lawsuits, which meant that perjury was indeed a serious offense. Brevard in his commentary on Exodus translates this commandment as "You shall not testify against your neighbor as a lying witness," which is similar to the NIV translation. "You shall not bear false testimony against your neighbor." Childs notes that Deuteronomy 19:19 specifies that if a witness is proven false, you shall do to him as he intended to do to his brother. Likewise, the Code of Hammurabi specifies that in capital cases, the false witness shall be put to death. Both in ancient and modern times, this commandment also applies to private conversations and gossiping, and stated positively bids us to protect our neighbor's reputation. The Church Fathers focus on our love for our neighbor when contemplating this commandment. St. Gregory Palamas, in our English translation, renders this commandment as, "You shall not accuse anyone falsely." We are warned that if we accuse anyone falsely, we may become like the devil, who falsely accused God to Eve and was cursed by God. Rather, we should conceal our neighbor's offense, unless by so doing others may be injured. And in this way we will imitate not Ham, but Shem and Japheth, and so like them receive the blessing. Now the story of Ham, the son of Noah, and the covering of Noah by his brothers Shem and Japheth, after the ark had landed in the new world, the world newly created, when Noah was overcome by despair and drink, is a favorite of the rabbi. Now the poetry of Genesis tells us this story the best. Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and was intoxicated. He then uncovered himself in the tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told it to his brothers who were outside. Shem and Japheth took the cloak, placed it on their shoulders, and walked backwards, covering the nakedness of their father. They faced away from him and did not see the nakedness of their father. Noah awoke from his wine and realized what had been done to him by his youngest son. And he said, "Cursed is Canaan, a slave of slaves shall he be to his brothers." Now perhaps the prohibition in slandering or bearing false witness is also referred to in the mitzvah forbidding us to build a roof on our house without a parapet, which is a fence on the roof. People in ancient Israel often slept on the roof in the summer to keep cool, and if you did not build a parapet on the roof, you would roll off and die when you fall several stories. As Deuteronomy exhorts, when you build a new home, you are to make a fence for your roof, and do not place blood liability in your house, for someone who should fall may fall from it. The Decalogue has a progression, both among the commandments that exhort us to love God with all of our heart, and with all of our soul, and with all of our strength, and with all of our mind, and those that exhort us to love our neighbor as ourselves. The progression is that we should think holy thoughts, so the words we speak are holy, so our actions are holy and righteous. Ilias the Presbyter teaches us that a person may have sullied his soul with words even if he has not degraded it by actions, and he may still be impure in his thoughts even if he watches over his words. For these are three different ways of sinning. And St. Maximus the Confessor warns us, do not listen gleefully to gossip at your neighbor's expense, or chatter to a person who likes finding fault. Otherwise you will fall away from divine love and find yourself cut off from eternal life. St. Thalassios links our thoughts about God to those of our neighbor. The intellect energized by divine love cultivates good thoughts about God, but when impelled by self-love, it produces diabolical thoughts. When the intellect is moved by love for its neighbor, it always thinks well of him, but when under diabolical influence, it entertains evil thoughts about him. The Church Fathers in Unseen Warfare teach us how giving careful attention to how we speak is the key to avoiding gossip and slander that slips out. We think we know more than they do. We grow too fond of the sound of our voice. We are warned. You should only speak of yourself and your accomplishments only when you're compelled to do so, and then you should be as brief and modest as possible. And the Church Fathers in Unseen Warfare continue. Good feelings are silent. Those feelings that seek expression in words are the most egotistical, feeding our self-love, always justifying our thoughts, putting us in the best light. Loquacity, endless talking, mostly comes from vainglory, wants to make us the expert in whatever we babble about. Such loose talk is spiritually dangerous. Empty talk is the door to criticism and slander, the spreader of false rumors and opinions, the sower of discord and strife. Empty talk stifles our imagination and tries to hide our ignorance. When wordy talk is over, and the fog of self-complacency lifts, it always leaves behind a sense of frustration and indolence. Does this not prove that, even involuntarily, the soul feels like it's been robbed? How should we speak? The Church Fathers in Unseen Warfare advise us not to speak about topics we're not sure of, particularly if we could harm someone if we express our opinion or if we confuse the simple hearts of listeners. Listen carefully and speak less. Also, when speaking or listening, raise the eye of your mind on high where your God is, thinking of his greatness and remembering that he never loses sight of you and looks at you with either disapproval or approval, according to what is in the thoughts of your heart, in your words, in your movements and actions. Silence is a great power in our unseen warfare and sure hope of gaining victory. Silence is preferred by he who does not rely on himself but trusts in God alone. Silence is the guardian of holy prayer and a miraculous helper in the practice of virtue. It is also a sign of spiritual wisdom. D.L. Moody pairs this command with the commandment not to take the Lord's name in vain. Language is what distinguishes us from the beasts. Language is what binds our social fabric. Our words must command confidence. Slander is murder by the tongue. Slanderers are like flies that settle on a man's sores, ignoring all that is good and noble about him. Slanders are like the burning tails of Samson's foxes that burn up the whole field of wheat in the world up in flame. D.L. Moody relates a story of a gossip who confessed her sins to a priest, and as a penance he gave her a thistle, and asked her to scatter the seeds one by one. She was puzzled by this, but did as he asked, and when she returned the priest asked her to gather the seeds back up. Such is the nature of slander. Slander scattered can never be gathered back up and forgotten. And the Oscar ceremonies at the 94th Academy Awards recently, when we were working on this video, provided an excellent object lessons on the spiritual dangers of slander and lying, and how these are often preceded by joking. And in our video on the ladder of divine ascent, in step 12 on lying, St. John Climacus teaches us, the offspring of flint and steel is fire, and the offspring of chatter and joking is lying. We are not justifying Will Smith's decision to slap Chris Rock when his joke offended Jada Smith, Will Smith's wife. And we also concur with those who feel that this is an act of violence, which could possibly have led to a criminal assault charge, is a greater offense than Chris Rock's joke. But the incident does illustrate the spiritual dangers of joking, especially jokes that belittle our neighbor, especially jokes about our neighbor's race, gender, weight, or ailment, all of which are either impossible or very difficult to change. And we know that monastic manuals, such as the Ladder of Divine Ascent, lay down strict rules that can be tempered by laymen, but everyone should be very cautious about what jokes they tell, especially jokes that laugh at our neighbor. And perhaps Christians should also be reluctant to become comedians. And St. John Climacus also teaches us that the liar commits a most serious sin. A lie is the destruction of love. You must be careful what you say, what you hear, and you should be especially careful lest your joking and chatting crosses over into gossip and slander. Laughs and jokes should never be at the expense of your neighbor's reputation and the salvation of your soul. Why do we lie and slander? Some lie for sheer wantonness, some for amusement, some to make bystanders laugh, some to trap their brothers and injure them. Hypocrisy is the mother of lying, and often is occasion. St. John Climacus teaches that there is a great spiritual danger in lying for any reason, even when we twist the truth to avoid hurting our neighbor or even save his reputation. And the good saint teaches us, when we are completely cleansed of lying, then we can resort to exaggeration, but only with fear and as occasion demands. And we discuss this in greater depth in our video on Dr. Laura and her rabbi's book on the Decalogue. We should always be very reluctant to exaggerate and twist the truth, only telling white lies when the truth would harm our neighbor. And we should never slander, as slandering is always done with malicious intent. And now we'll discuss the sources we use for this video. Since so many of our videos on the Decalogue use many of the same multiple sources, we decided to cut videos on the book reviews so we're not overly repetitive, and we have a video on book reviews for books that discuss the Decalogue, or 10 Commandments. The YouTube description includes a link to our PowerPoint script that we uploaded to SlideShare and also our blog. Please support this channel by sharing this video with your friends and by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons and by clicking on the Amazon links to purchase any of the books we discussed, which will earn us a very small affiliate commission. And please consider becoming a patron of our channel. Plus, we will host special discussion groups for our patrons. Plus, you can click on the Meetup or small M icon to participate in our online discussions, where we practice our future YouTube scripts. And please click on the links for other videos that will broaden your knowledge and improve your soul.